This is Talking Sense with Dollar Bill. I'm David, Common Sense. Complicated issues like business operations and taxes require complex explanations. Talking Sense with Dollar Bill will explain these issues in plain language and have fun doing it. We must disclose that all opinions expressed on the show are of the hosts, and we advise that you consult a tax professional or attorney regarding any financial or business decisions. We always encourage your questions. Email them to us at info@talkingsensewithdollarbill.com. That's sense with a C. And now, without any further ado, I give you your host, Dollar Bill.
Well, welcome to the program, and happy to have a guest today.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the program. It's great to be with all you listeners out there. Great to be with you, Dollar Bill. And it's also great to be with a dear friend of mine and also yours, Dollar Bill, Tom Shepstone of Shepstone Management Company, Inc., based in Honesdale, Pennsylvania, where we're going to talk a lot about some topics that are near and dear to our hearts, topics that we've talked about on the show. But today we're going to get into some detail, topics like feasibility studies and management. So just want to say that we're so grateful to have you here, Tom. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, Dave, it's my pleasure to be here with you and Dollar Bill. And I've known Dollar Bill for, I think we figured out before the program, at least 41 years. So, and we still talk, you know. So we know each other a long, long time. And yeah, and I have a consulting business in Honesdale called Shepstone Management Company. I've been in the consulting business since 1977, and I've done work primarily in the land use and market areas. I do a lot of demographic research. I do a lot of economic stuff. I do a lot of zoning work. And I primarily operate in New York and Pennsylvania. Surprisingly, a little bit more in New York maybe than Pennsylvania. But I've done work in other states from New Jersey to California, and Oklahoma. So it's my pleasure to be here and discuss some of that with you.
Well, thanks for being here, Tom, and I do appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion and look at the options that not only are available to the public in general, but I know a lot of your work does involve municipalities, and that is an area that, of course, is interest to me, especially since I wound up getting many condolences as I joined the Borough Council.
Yes.
In any case, feasibility studies and land use, can you give us a bit of explanation of what goes into that kind of process?
Sure. Let me just give you a little history on it. I mean, I first got involved in doing this kind of work because I was working with some attorneys and some realtors on different projects that they had in mind, looking at things from a zoning and a land use regulatory standpoint. And some of them said, you know, we really need to have to know more about this property or this project. We need to have more demographics. We need to know what's going on with the land itself that we're dealing with. Does it have proper soils? Does it have wetlands? What does the zoning allow on the site? What's the maximum density that we could achieve if we're doing housing? Are we allowed to put a movie theater there? You know, things like this. And demographics, of course, enters into it. And not many people dig deeply into demographics. I do, because that's part of being a planner. You want to look at growth going forward. So I have a subscription, as a matter of fact, with a company called STDB, the Site to Do Business, which has a relationship with ESRI, which is a nationwide firm that does basically market studies for every big company, McDonald's, whoever, whatever, hotel chains. You'll see ESRI data and mapping utilized widely in market studies for all sorts of businesses. So I have a subscription to that, and I'm able to generate a lot of demographic data. And, of course, I'm very familiar with the census data itself, but the census doesn't really project forward. So with the subscription I have and my familiarity with this, we're able to look at, as best we can, maybe 5 years ahead and say, this is where it's going. This is what the trend is. So, and we would look at things like, in that case, you know, what's the median income of the year? If you're talking about putting in a Wegmans, for example, you'd want to know that the income is a little bit up there, not terribly up there, but a little bit up there. And the same thing would apply if you're putting in a discount clothing store. If you want to put a discount clothing store, you'd look for some place where the median income is a little bit lower than average, where the demand would be greater. So those kind of questions enter into it when we do a land use and market feasibility study. And from the land use perspective, it's usually about saying, this is what you can do with the property. From the market feasibility standpoint, it's about, what is the likely demand? And if we're talking about something like housing, the obvious questions are, what kind of growth do we expect? How much demand for units? And what type of units are there? And what prices would they be? And what's the competition? Okay, so these are all things that go into it. I've done many studies of that sort for housing projects, many of them. So that's kind of the background, Bill.
Well, that's fantastic. And I'm sure, too, when you're doing those types of evaluation, you're not only applying the resources that you have, but you're also looking at the immediate region that you're absolutely evaluating. Because a lot of times you might have a study that's provided to you, but it doesn't necessarily relate to the same region that you're attempting to evaluate.
That's such a great point, because here in Wayne County, we're in the northeastern part of Pennsylvania. Okay, so we're surrounded on two sides, or we're joined on two sides, I should say, by New York State. And so if you were to just look at Wayne County, or let's say Honesdale, or maybe even the Honesdale and its surrounding municipalities, you would come up with one estimate of what the demand is, for example. But if you're looking at commercial projects, you would want to look also at the New York State side, because the western side of Sullivan County, New York, basically shops in Honesdale. Mm-hmm. They do not shop in Monticello and Liberty. They shop in Honesdale. So people who live in the town of Delaware, the town of Tustin, town of Coshocton, town of Fremont, even the town of Highland, all those people will come this way to shop. And so your demand is going to be a little different. And you also have to consider the tourism factor. We have Lake Wallenpaupack. We have the Upper Delaware National Scenic and Recreational River. We have a number of things that generate more than average population. Wallenpaupack is probably the biggest gorilla in that respect.
And the factor that you're raising as you discuss this is not only the access, but the seasonality.
That's correct. And you want to look at traffic. One of the things that we always look for when we do these kinds of things is we get out the PennDOT data on traffic. You can go onto the PennDOT website, and if you put in PennDOT maps, you just search for that, it'll pop up and it'll give you several choices of maps you can look at. And one of those maps is traffic volume maps. So if you look at those traffic volume maps, it will tell you for various sections of highways what the traffic is. So, for example, we know that the Indian Orchard area has probably the highest traffic at this point in the county, other than Route 380. 84 would be a little bit below that. But it's important to understand that and where the traffic is coming from. Which side of Honesdale do you want to be on? That was a question I was asked a long time ago. Which would you want to be on Route 6, or would you want to be on 191? Which one is the best side to be on if you want to locate something, a new business?
And of course, that would also depend on the nature of the business.
Of course. and there's also what's called the retail agglomeration effect, which is essentially a big long word or phrase that covers the fact that like businesses do better when they're next to each other. So that's why you always see McDonald's next to Burger King. That's why it happens. That's why I remember years ago when we had a Kmart and Walmart came to town, and the comment I heard from actually a person who used to be on the borough council, he said, "I can't understand that. Why would they come here when Kmart's already here?" Well, the reason is because Kmart's already pulling customers into the area, and you're going to offer an alternative.
Right.
So it makes it a better shopping area. We have a perfect example in Honesdale today, where we have two of the biggest motorcycle dealers in Pennsylvania. We have Rusty Palmer, so is a name connected with Honesdale, and we also have Bears, which is also a name connected with Honesdale. And I can tell you from doing work in New York and nearby areas, I was out in western New York, probably 10, 15 years ago, way out towards Buffalo, that area. And somebody wanted to know where I was from, and they said, "Oh yeah, that's where Rusty Palmer's is, or that's where Bears is." I forget which one it was, but people come to Honesdale because it's a site for motorcycles. Yeah. It's where you go to get that kind of equipment.
And to that extent, George Bear was quite the man. There's no question about it.
There's no question.
And at the same time, I had an opportunity to be with him for a while, and the fact of the matter is, I have a place down in Boynton Beach, Florida, and the gentleman across the street tells me how frequently he used to go to Bear motorcycles.
Yeah, and I had some other examples. I found over the years that the three things people would talk about was one or the other of our motorcycle dealers, Marshall Machinery, or the Alpine Restaurant. Yeah. Those are the things people knew Honesdale for. Yeah. And that's part of what you look at. I mean, and that's almost an unquantifiable thing. You just have to kind of say, this is what it is. And for many years, Pennsylvania used to have a system where to get a liquor license, you had to prove that one was needed above the quota, because the quota, and there was a lot of wrinkles to it, but basically the quota for a regular liquor license was 1 per 3,000 population. I think they later changed it to 1 to 2,000 or vice versa. But anyway, but there was a loophole, of course. The loophole was if you could prove that it was a resort area and you could prove that there was a need, then you could get one above the quota. I did that about 70 times. And so it sounds absurd. How do you prove the need for another liquor license? Well, the answer is, you go out and you look at other restaurants and you evaluate each one and say, well, they have a German, they have an Italian, but they don't have any other types of
Irishman.
Irish. There you go. Thank you. Irish is
the real drinkers.
Yeah, that's right. So you would say, there's German, Italian, but there's no Irish, and what you're proposing is very distinct.
Okay.
So.
And Tom, I appreciate all that we're talking about, and I want the listeners to understand the reason that we have consultants is because we know the resources to use, and we're able to secure the information in an efficient and functional way. And a lot of people like to do it yourself type thing. Now, there's real challenges when you start trying to do it yourself.
Yes.
You may not understand the importance of a particular question. So it's very important, in my estimation, that you always, no matter how much you want to do it yourself, consult with an individual who has the background in a particular area. And certainly Tom has demonstrated and is able to support the fact that he knows where to find the info.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's really how I define my business, knowing where to find the information. That's really how I describe what I do. And I remember a long time ago, 60 years ago, when I was a young kid in a one-room school, we were visited by the school superintendent at the time, and he made that comment. We were doing one of these geography things where you like a contest, who can find a city first, and afterwards he said to all of us, he says, "It's not. You see, what you learned is it's not so important what you know, but how to find it." Yeah. So and it stuck with me all these years,
And the challenges of actually knowing how to research something, that's why, too, in many instances, it may not be the ability to know the answer as to know the right questions.
Yeah, that's right. And I get most of my work from, in this regard, from attorneys or realtors. That's where it generally comes from, is those kind of people. And they usually refer somebody who's interested in starting something new or developing a property. They'll refer them to me and say, well, get Shepstone. He likes to wallow in all that data, So that's kind of the way it works,
Well, as you know, I'm involved with the Honesdale Borough, and we're in the process of trying to develop a stormwater plan.
Oh, yeah.
And so in so doing, I'm trying to secure appropriate topographical maps. But no matter what Honesdale itself does, since we're in the bottom of the bowl, nothing that we do will mean anything unless we have the cooperation of the county and we're able to look at Berlin and Texas and Cherry Ridge and really assess our whole topographical existence in order to reconcile and establish an appropriate, let's say, 5 or 10 year plan to approach how to deal with stormwater.
Right. And it does require special expertise. And that's one area I stay away from. I know enough about it just to be dangerous, and I always defer to the engineers. But it's important also to realize when you're looking at a property, trying to think about a project, that these things come into play. A lot of people approach, I've got an idea, I want to do a new business or I want to develop a property. They have no idea that there's such things as stormwater regulations out there, or how complicated they are, or the fact that you need an engineer or somebody of equivalent qualifications to do it. And so that's one of the key things that goes into feasibility is you're letting somebody understand what they're getting into. So, and if anybody buys a property and doesn't do due diligence on it, and so in other words, agreement of sale should always have a due diligence period where you go in and you investigate whether or not you can get your zoning approvals, whether or not the stormwater regulations are going to allow you to do what you want to do. How much of the land is it going to consume? What's going to be left over for you? What's it going to cost? Is there going to be a bond for maintaining that stuff? You know, things like that. And a lot of people just simply aren't aware of that kind of thing. And so I'd like to think that one of the valuable things that people like myself do is that you acquaint people with the process and what they're up against. And I don't mean that negatively, but it's just you need to understand it. You don't want to go in naively because you're going to get buried.
It's just the nature of the beast.
That's correct.
You have to really understand the processes that are required in order to comply with the circumstances that will allow you to achieve what it is you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and when you're talking about getting permits and things, I recall an instance one time with I was sitting in a room where the municipality governing body was entertaining an application for a project, and the owner was there representing himself, and he had his attorney in the back just in case he got in trouble. And of course, he should have had it exactly the opposite, you know. And of course, he got denied, you know. Yeah. So he did get in trouble, and by that time, the attorney couldn't get him out of it, you know. So you're right. You need to have the professional representation.
At the same time, you know, I've heard on many occasions when you have an attorney who represents himself, yeah, he's got a fool for a client.
Yes. I think that might have been a Lincoln quote. I'm not sure, but whoever first came up with it, that's true.
And the challenges that we all have, and what's amazing too, though, is there are those rare occasions where somebody goes into a conflict and they do represent themselves and they have done their homework and they're able to make a good presentation, and on occasion they'll win. Yep. So it is a challenging circumstance where, but I find that the more knowledgeable the client is, the more effective I can be.
Exactly. Exactly, and that was very well put. And when you have a good team. And let me point out that the teamwork on these things is very important. I mean, I've been involved in a number of land condemnation cases where I was part of a team that was asking for an appropriate financial compensation for a condemnation of land. Okay? And I've been involved in a number of those. And it was not a local attorney, Pike County attorney. That's still local. Yeah. Pike County attorney who had made a career out of doing this kind of stuff, and he was so thorough. You know, he'd always have he'd have himself, the client, usually me. He'd have an appraiser, and probably he'd have an engineer. So there'd be at least 5 people on the team.
There you go. And what I've said in prior episodes, yeah, when the client is the hub of a wheel and the wheel has many spokes.
Yeah.
And whether it's a banker, the insurance agent, the consultant, the attorney, the accountant, those are your spokes.
Yeah, that's right.
And on a rare occasion, you might have to replace one.
Yeah, yeah.
But the process is to get all the spokes in the same direction.
Yeah. And when you do that, it makes a powerful case because typically if you're up against, let's say, a PennDOT or something like that, they're not going to have that. They're going to have one lawyer or maybe two from the agency, and they're going to have an appraiser, and that's it. It's not a team approach. And it's, I don't want to be too cocky about it, but it's not too hard to beat them. I mean,
no, but the team approach is what makes it possible.
That's correct.
Because you've got that unit working in a single fashion.
And you know what to expect, and you marshal your data, same as you do with any feasibility study. You marshal your data, you look at it, you put it forward.
Yeah.
Is your employee manual outdated? Need help recruiting or handling employee concerns? Harvest Inc. is here for you. We offer customized HR packages for your business. Right now, you can claim 60 minutes of complimentary workplace HR consulting. No sales pitch, no strings. Visit us at harvestinc.com. Our specialists listen to your concerns and implement HR best practices. Harvest Inc. Affordable, reliable, accountable. We make workplaces better. Call us 570-542-5330.
And now back to our conversation with Tom Shepstone.
And thank you for listening, and I'm sure that some of the issues we're discussing are hopefully giving you rise to some thoughtful contemplation. And there was a situation back in the 80s that I was evaluating the acquisition of a apartment complex. And in so doing, it was in the Towanda area, up near the New York border. And that particular project had 37 two-bedroom apartments, and it was relatively close to the Robert Packard Institution up there. And there was bus service right from the property to the hospital and back. So you would figure that most of the tenants were in some way affiliated with the hospital and would be good tenants to occupy the property.
Right.
However, in doing the evaluation of trying to determine and doing my due diligence and spending about $10,000 of evaluation process, I actually got into a circumstance where I wound up walking away from the deal. So that due diligence and that feasibility and recognizing what you need to do is really important. I have no idea what happened to the property subsequent to my decision not to proceed with it. I'm sure somebody else may have done it. But one of the issues that came to light when I was evaluating it, the sanitary and sewer system was on an adjacent parcel that was not owned by the property. That made a substantial difference in whether you were able to sustain and maintain the property in the future without acquiring the other property.
Correct, because you would be at their mercy, so to speak. So there's often factors like that enter into it, and the really you've got to research everything, and you've got to look in a case like what you're talking about, looking at the competition, so to speak, is critically important. You know, if you're talking, that's a significant size project, and so you'd want to look at other comparable projects in the area and get an idea what's the circumstance with those.
You know, Tom, in your experience, what have been the most common oversights that businesses make when disregarding or inadequately performing feasibility studies?
Well, they of course always are optimistic, or they wouldn't be pursuing it. Okay, so when you're too optimistic, you have a tendency to believe your own spiel, and so that's the hard part. You need to be able to objectively look at it, and that's why I just mentioned in response to Bill that looking at other projects is so important. It doesn't matter what kind of feasibility study you're doing or anything similar to that. You need to look at comparable situations. And people tend not to do that. They tend to think, I'm going to be different. I know everything. And so the first thing that you have to submit is your arrogance, and you've got to be humble. You know, you've got to be you got to have some humility, and look to other people to tell you what could go wrong. And that's why it's important to have a really good attorney. That's why it's important to have a really good accountant. I'm not just saying that for Dollar Bill's benefit here. You've got to have that expertise, and at the end of the day, you'll have to make your own judgment. But the weakness you have to overcome is your own optimism, which is what it's going to carry you forward if you do it. So it's kind of ironic, but you've got to kind of cultivate a worst-case scenario.
And Tom, you're bringing in a really interesting point that I've talked about before. Salespeople have a tendency to be overly optimistic,
yes.
and I don't want to hinder that attitude because it's certainly going to be appropriate for them because it works for them in terms of generating new business.
Correct.
However, when you're doing an evaluation, you have to bring it back to reality. I'll get a salesman, we're going to do $1.5 million in 6 months. And if I think they're going to do $500,000, that's what I predict.
Yeah,
So,
right. And you really, one of the critical mistakes people often think is it's going to be 0 to 90 in a very short time. And really, you need a much longer period of time. You need to project out 3 to 5 years and say, and probably not get to where you want to be till 3 to 5 years. And you need to have enough working capital, obviously,
to survive that distance.
That's right, and this is where the accountant comes in, obviously, in helping the person to see that.
And so many people. Oh, look at that! He's an overnight success.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that overnight took 10 years.
Yeah, no question about it. And there's a lot to it, and it's important that people, as I said, do their homework in a very thorough and almost self-deprecating way. You've got to control your natural impulses to be optimistic.
Well, we're looking at probably wrapping up the presentation this morning here, but in one of the last things, some oversights or some direction that you would think that the markets might be incurring under current circumstances. What do you think the future may hold for our little community here?
Well, I think areas like this will have opportunities of a low-key nature that will continue to exist and may bloom somewhat. I think the country's in deep trouble. I don't want to make any pretense about that. We've got not only inflation but dramatic overspending and a whole host of problems. So
yes, and these issues are not going to be easy to overcome by any stretch of the imagination.
Not a bit.
One of the most challenging, of course, is the fuel, which means every product is going to have to be increased as the fuel prices continue to increase.
And so I want to thank our guest, Tom Shepstone of Shepstone Management Company, Inc. in Honesdale, Pennsylvania, for a really lively discussion. Tom, you're an expert at what you do, and just as I mentioned before, you're a dear friend, and just really want to thank you for being on the show with us.
It's my total pleasure.
Now, all I can say is thank you for listening, and we hope you've enjoyed this program, and may your cents turn into dollars.